Do you feel ready to go, Wendy?
I'm ready to go.
Okay.
Yeah.
I give a quick intro. As I was just saying when we were chatting that Wendy Red Star, I met exactly a year ago. Met you in person. I knew you worked before that. But you were at VSC and you were a visiting artist and you gave one of my very favorite artist talks. And that is not a lie. That is the truth. I still talk about it. I also still talk about that coat that you wore.
Yes.
That stopped the entire dining hall. And
That was a
everyone turned.
standing ovation. Yeah.
Yes, that's right. Everyone stopped and turned, but then people started clapping, and yeah, I think people stood up. Like it was
Oh,
amazing.
wait. No, I don't think they stood up. I stood up
I don't
and they
know. I
clapped, but
think
it felt like a
everyone stood
standing.
up one day.
It was crazy.
It was great. It was really great. And so now Wendy is back virtually with Vermont Studio Center. She is currently actually at an artist residency. And so if you see her name on the screen, it comes up as Carl Davis. That is not Wendy's pseudonym, but it is the director of, you said it's the Crow Shadow Institute of the Art, located
Correct.
at the Umatilla, is that how you pronounce it, reservation?
Umatilla, yep.
Umatilla, and that's in Pendleton, Oregon, so she's out on the West Coast. And so she has her mask on because she's in a kind of a shared space. So we have to read everything through her eyes. And Wendy's going to talk to us about how she has guest edited Aperture's Native America issue that just came out. It looks like what's on your screen. It also looks like what's here. It's amazing. Oh, yes. See, we get a three-way there. It smells good. I'm actually getting, this is VSC's copy. I'm getting my own copy from when I ordered it. So let's see, what else? And then, and so this is something we've always done at Vermont Studio Center. I am not at Vermont Studio Center right now. I'm in upstate New York. But what we do, Kathy Black, program director, typically does a land acknowledgement at our first night. And since this is not only Indigenous Peoples Day, and we're talking to Wendy about that and trying to talk more about what it's like to be a citizen in America, in North America specifically. This is what we are hoping to maybe start saying more, so it's so much of a habit. But Vermont Studio Center recognizes it operates on land which has long served as a site of meeting and exchange among Indigenous peoples for thousands of years and is the home of the Abenaki, Kawasuk, Missisquoi, Pennacook, and Wabanaki people. We honor, recognize, and respect these peoples as the traditional stewards of the lands and waters on which we gather. And without further ado, here is Wendy Red Star, and I have everyone muted, but if you have a question, please chat it. And Wendy said to go ahead and ask anytime during this talk, and I'll read the questions to her. All right, Wendy, you have the floor.
All right. Hi, everyone. Pardon I have the mask on, so hopefully I can be really expressive through my voice and my eyes, as Kristen said. But yes, I'm currently on the Umatilla Reservation at the Crow Shadow Institute of the Arts, which was founded by James Lavador, who is Umatilla, and he's an amazing artist. And he had this vision of, he's a painter, and he had this vision of having a master printer space on his reservation that then he would bring artists to come and work with that master printer. And the Native community here could have an opportunity to meet these artists and also participate in printmaking. And I'm so terrible, I can't tell you when Crow Shadow was founded, but this is actually my third time doing this residency. It's my favorite residency. I feel right at home because it reminds me so much of my reservation, the Crow Reservation in Montana. There's a real kind of cowboys and Indians vibe here. There's a big Pendleton Roundup that they have in Pendleton, Oregon, which is a big rodeo. And I just find a lot of success here. And the actual print shop is located in this old mission And so it's just a really interesting fill, and I get to take walks after I'm done working kind of out in the open fields. But it's just really amazing. So thank you so much, Vermont Studio Center, for bringing me today to talk, especially on Indigenous Peoples Day. I'm feeling like a lot of love on Instagram.
Yeah.
A ton of posting with my work. And so I just feel really honored and just totally excited to have this issue out. It was released last month, and Aperture, they contacted me, Brendan and Michael, who are the editors of Aperture, reached out to me a little over a year ago and asked if I would be interested in editing an issue, a special issue that would focus on Indigenous people. And my background is actually, my educational background is in sculpture, both in my BFA and my MFA, but I happen to have a great love for images and photos and have been using those just all the time in my practice. So there's a little bit of an imposter feeling I get because I don't have a classical training in photography. So that was one of the things that I said to them straight out the bat, that like, you know, I don't have this training, but I have this other angle and other approach to photography. And then the other thing I said to them is that I'm really interested in also focusing on Native artists who also kind of come from sort of different ways of approaching photos. And it might not be their like main medium. I think actually all of the artists in here, except for one, photography is not like, they're pretty interdisciplinary in their practice. And the other thing I'd like to say is that this issue was produced entirely during the pandemic, and so it's the first issue that was produced with Aperture through that. And we really started to kind of gear up in the making of this during kind of the height of when everything was sort of shutting down. And it was great to be able to have this project, to reach out to these Native artists and have an opportunity to connect with them, talk about some of the themes of this issue. So right here, I have this PDF, and I'm working with this computer that is totally new to me. And so I'm gonna just scroll through this PDF, which is actually the entire magazine. So let me get to kind of the introduction here. There we go, Native America. And so the sort of themes that I was really thinking about were a lot about language and sort of the perception and interpretation of language through different Native nations. So that was a theme. Origin stories kind of came up a lot. Working intergenerationally, archives, collections. Those are kind of some of the major overarching themes. And then from there, I just sort of started thinking of artists. And excuse me, I just like totally passed over Martine Gutierrez, who is our cover artist. And Martine is incredible. And this image, actually from the very get-go, we thought like, this is gonna be the cover. And then we sort of batted around and we just could not have this be the cover. It's such a powerful image, and it's Martine dressed in some of her father's clothing. It's just such a powerful, striking image. But let's scoot down here. So one of the first articles is a conversation between me and Emily Mozami, who is the head archivist at the National Museum of the American Indian. And I did a Smithsonian Artist Research Fellowship in 2018 where I focused on doing my research at the National Museum of the American Indian, the National Anthropological Archives, and the National Museum of Natural History. And I was really interested in like looking at everything that they had that had to do with my community, which is Apsáalooke or Crow. And so Emily, she's the photo archivist. And so it was just this phenomenal experience of looking at images from different photographers, and then actually in looking at these images, finding pictures of my ancestors. So for instance, this man right here, his name is Beartail, and he is my great-great-grandfather. And the image is taken by Fred Miller. And this is an image that I actually knew about. It's a great image. He's actually wearing these glasses. He's got his medicine bundle here and a sword. And he was a very powerful medicine man. So there's stories about him in the community, of him. He had wind medicine. And so he could make the wind come, and there's a story about him floating up to these rocks, these rock formations that people weren't able to get up on the top because there was like a, I don't know what you'd call it, like a sort of overhang. And so he went up there and he fasted and then came back down. And then he told some of the community that he had just come from a vision quest there, and they sort of laughed at him. And then he's like, well, I'm not going to take that. And they had like a little, I think like a gathering or something like that. And he rode his horse 4 times around the gathering and then went away. And then the wind came and knocked all their houses down. So that's just sort of the story my grandma would tell. And then she'd point out the mountain in which he fasted. But this other image over here, this is the one that really got me. I was just sort of, they have these binders that are just Xerox copies of the negatives and some of the glass plates. And when I looked at this one and I looked at the people, it said that, where is the, just want to make sure I'm saying this right. It said black hair, who would be this man here, and small medicine, tobacco, this little girl, and Red Star. And so Red Star, if this is correct, Red Star would be my great-grandfather. So that's how I got my last name, is from him, because during that time period when they divided the reservation, our reservation, into allotments, they allotted land to head of households. And so Red Star was a head of household at that time. And then his wife and children then took on his name. So that was just, all Crows just had names, and you have first and last name. So that's how I got my last name. But with this particular image, I looked into the dates. And when this was taken, my great-grandfather, Red Star, would have been like a young man. So there's no way that he could have been this little boy. So then I looked into the census records, and I thought, well, maybe this is actually my grandfather, Wallace Red Star Sr. And so I called up my dad, and I shared this image, and we were having a conversation, and I sent him the image, and he's like, oh yeah, that's your grandpa with crooked face, and I can't remember the little girl's name. And I was like, what? You knew this the whole time? And so when I look at the dates, my grandfather was born in 1907, and this was kind of taken in the early 1900s. So this possibly could be my grandfather. And so then that sort of kind of set me on this whole like path of trying to figure this out, because this image was in the National Museum of the American Indian, and it's also a copy of it is in the National Anthropological Archives. And they have this little boy at NAA listed as Sydney Blackhair. So it's a little bit of a mystery. And so this article, we kind of go into depth about identifying Native people in historical images and how to kind of go about that. like looking at census records and looking at different collections and comparing notes. And one of the questions I had with her, with Emily, was like, what happens? Like, I just came with this information. What happens with that information? And she said, well, we write it down in our notes. And so then when the next researcher comes, they'll have all of these notes. And it's so important that none of those notes get erased, because now that is a part of that photo story. This is the 1880 Crow delegation. And then another amazing thing that happened is I found my great-great-grandmother. Her dreams are true. And I was doing a lot of genealogy research, and so I knew that name was in our genealogy, and then flipping through the photos, and then I looked, and luckily they had a name for her, and it was my great-great-grandma, and I was just blown away. So then after the residency, I came back to Portland, because that's where I'm based, and I knew this other photographer who was photographing on our reservation about the same time, named Richard Thrussell. And so I just was like, why don't I just take a look at his archive, which is at in Laramie, Wyoming. And I was cruising through his images and I found her again. So it was just really kind of great. And so it's just kind of this interesting web. And in Richard Thrussell's archives, he has her listed as Julia, and her English name is Julia Bad Boy. And this is a picture of my father and my daughter Beatrice, who I think I can announce this. There's a series, a body of work that I did called Accession Series. And I used this image in that body of work, and it was just acquired by the Museum of Modern Art. Yeah, I'm so excited. And then I called my dad up and I was like, yo, you're in the Museum of Modern Art. How do you feel about that? And he was like pretty happy about it. This next article is about Richard Thrussell, who photographed my great-great-grandmother. And Richard Thrussell happened to be half Cree and half Scottish. And he was originally from Canada, and his family worked with the Hudson Bay Company. And then they moved from Canada to Washington because the Hudson Bay created like another, what would you call that, hub there in Washington. And he had an autoimmune disease that required him back in that time to be in a more drier climate. And his brother happened to be working on the Crow Reservation with the government. And so he took up a job there, but while he was there, he became really interested in art and painting. And there was the painter named Joseph Henry Sharp, who was living on the reservation at that time. So he started taking up lessons with Joseph Henry Sharp. And then he was also hired to photograph. And lo and behold, Edward Curtis came to our reservation around the early 1900s. And Richard Thrussell became very influenced by Edward Curtis and really kind of took up photography and actually even traveled to Edward Curtis's studio in Seattle. And so this is one of Richard Thrussell's photographs. And there is a book on Richard Thrussell, but it's pretty obscure. And I wanted to include him in the magazine along with another photographer named Horace Pula, who I believe is a Kiowa. And the reason why we chose these two to pair together, Horace is a little, he's younger, and Fred Miller is older. But the thing that really struck me about both of their images is that they were photographing these transitions in time for Native people. Richard really kind of photographing the sort of transition into more Western times. And then Horace years later, I believe these are in the 50s, sort of also capturing this sort of time period. And it was just kind of this really interesting, great balance. And let me see. So it's just a beautiful article by Rebecca Bengal that kind of balances their practices and talks about sort of the state of change that Native people were going through during that time. So Richard Thrussell being in the early to mid 1900s. This is one of my favorite photos by Richard Thrussell. It's called Interior of the Best Indian Kitchen on the Crow Reservation in 1910. And this is actually, he was hired by the Indian Health Service to photograph because there was a giant tuberculosis outbreak happening. And so they were trying to encourage crows not to eat on the ground. So they would typically lay a blanket out and have their food. And so they just basically set up this scene. And there's some like powerful cultural clash happening here, you know, with them and their beautiful regalia with this fine china. And it's just like there's like a tension in this photo that I'm really attracted to. But also just like knowing the history behind it for tuberculosis and Indian Health Service. So another thing that was really important in this issue was to include different types of writers. And so we reached out to some poets and some fiction writers, and Natalie Diaz, we reached out to her. She's this amazing poet. And what we basically test the poets and the writers with is to mine their own family photographs and select from their own family's photographs, and then write something about the photos that they chose. And so this is actually, when I read this, it made me cry because it's about her brother. And Natalie actually became like a professional basketball player. So she sort of talks about how she kind of followed in her brother's footsteps, but then sort of his struggles also with a drug addiction. And it's just really beautiful. And it was kind of a perfect thing to read during all the pandemic stuff happening. Dwayne Linklater, he is First Nations. He's Cree from Canada. And Aperture actually did another Native issue called, in 1995, called Strong Hearts in Native American Visions and Voices. And I reached out to Dwayne about including him and also commissioning him to do like a new body of work specifically for the magazine. And in our conversation, he's like, yeah, I think I remember this issue. And there were artists that really influenced me, like Zig Jackson. I just remember it to be kind of like this really important publication for myself as a young artist. And so he asked if Aperture could ship him a copy of that issue, and then he would, from that issue, produce a new body of work, utilizing some of the pages with his own sort of mark making and folding. And Dwayne's just kind of an amazing person in that way, where he's always sort of reflecting back and acknowledging past artists. But he's also kind of holding account different institutions and asking, like, have they ever shown other Native artists before? And there's a great connection with another artist in here that Dwayne did sort of the same thing, asking an institution that that artist had worked with. I'll get to that. So here's Dwayne's very thoughtful work. And Dwayne does this amazing thing where he sort of holds information. So like some of the lines are obscured by the folding of the paper, including some of the images and the articles. And I've learned this really great lesson from him, that sometimes you don't get to have all the information and you have to kind of sit with that. And when I think about Native artists and how a lot of our material culture has been taken and put into collections by anthropologists, and that history of like all of our cultural knowledge kind of being taken, there's something really powerful about like, no, like this is information that is going to be in these folds, that you're just going to have to respect that. And so that's something that I've always found really powerful about Dwayne and the work that Dwayne does. Martine Gutierrez. So Martine, I was so excited to include her work, and specifically this work called Indigenous Woman. And these are just a select few images from that series, which was actually a 124-page magazine that Martine created called Indigenous Woman, in which she became kind of she did all the writing for it. Like she pretended to interview herself. She did all the different spreads and the advertisement. And I can't remember, it was like a years-long project. And so these are just some of the spreads from that project. And Martine just gave a talk, I think it was a couple weeks ago, for Aperture with Nadia Rivera Fala, who wrote the little piece on this work. And it was great because Martine showed up to the Zoom meeting in her bed with a wig on. And I was like, I was thinking I might do that for this talk, but I don't think we could get the bed in this office space. But I was like, if only it could be like Martine. But there's just like this pure, and the powerful statement was with this is that Martine mentioned that she just did not see a fashion magazine, or didn't think a fashion magazine would include a person like her or images that she wanted to see. So she just decided she would make that happen. And including all the font, it's incredible. Here's another poet, and these are the Quarantine album by Tommy Pico, and just select images from his childhood. This is such a fabulous image. I'm so proud of this particular spread with this artist, Kimwan Mechuis, who is First Nations, also Cree. And this is the artist that I was talking about with Dwayne, because Kimwan actually, unfortunately, has passed away. I believe Kimwan passed away in like the late 2000s. And I was first introduced to Kimwan's work through Facebook, of all places. I'm no longer on Facebook, but there is this artist named Larry McNeil who went to graduate school with Kimwan. And he had sort of posted this thing, I think it was a year to mark the anniversary of his passing. And I just became kind of intrigued. So I clicked on Kimwan's personal Facebook page, which I think is archived now, but it's no longer on Facebook. And it was incredible because it was like this memorial of Kimwan. And so I just spent an hour, several hours just going through his page and reading all these people who had written such lovely things about him. Like, it really made me want to meet him. But beyond that, his work I found to be quite powerful, and just the thought process sort of got this thing about sort of archiving and categorizing certain images. And so he did this project called Without Ground. I'm sorry if I'm like driving you guys crazy by scrolling up and down. Without Ground in 2002, an installation at the Institute of Contemporary Art, where he photographed himself kind of like looking around at the ground, and then took those photographs and then kind of shellacked them to the wall. So he's sort of kind of in space, and it looked like he was investigating. something on the ground in this hallway. And then he knew that that space that they would then eventually like paint over it over the years and cover up the work. But I'm gonna pull out my magazine here. There's something that really fabulous that he said. He said, "I think North America is a crime scene," Michelson said of Without Ground in 2006. "I hate to say it, but what happened to the land and people here was and slash is a crime. People today don't see that. They understand it, they know it, but it doesn't seem to mean that much to them. To me, it means a lot in many ways. The White Museum Wall became a site on which to consider the theft of Indigenous land evoked by the installation's title, an example of the ways in which Michelson photography re-articulates colonial memory." And so fast forward several years later, and after the passing of Kim Wan, Dwayne in 2014 was invited to have a show there. And then Dwayne asked that institution, "In the history of showing, how many Native artists have you shown?" And I think that it was only Kim Wan. And so they sent Kim Wan's project and images of what they had. And so then Dwayne pitched to them that he would try to uncover or excavate those photos by removing the paint layers. And so it was just kind of this really beautiful, beautiful project. And then another great connection was when I was doing my Smithsonian Artist Research Fellowship. Kim Wan, before his passing, gifted all of his work and papers to the National Museum of the American Indian. So all of his work is archived there, and I was able to actually see this work in person and his journals and sketchbook. And Chris Green just did a really beautiful job writing about Kim Wan's work. And to my knowledge, there isn't a lot of scholarship on Kim Wan's work, and so this is kind of a major piece of scholarship. So another artist, I don't know if she would call herself an artist, so her name is Jacqueline Cleveland, and she's Alaska Native. I believe she is Yupik. And I actually knew her from undergrad. And again, this is like one of those Facebook things. And so we went to undergrad at Montana State University, and I was in the art department, and she was in the film department. And the way that we met is because of the Native Student Union buildings. So all the Native students would kind of meet. And so I met her there, and then she sort of introduced me to like the film department. And then from there we graduated, went our separate ways, but I followed her on Facebook, and she had this really great Facebook presence and she would photograph her community out harvesting, hunting, and it really made me feel like I was actually there with her. There was just a way about her photography that really made you feel kind of like you were with that community. And so I mentioned this to Aperture, that I would really love to kind of reach out to her again and see what she's up to. And I think she's working in journalism. So I reached out to her, and then she mentioned that what she's been doing with the different villages on the Yupik coast is photographing different plants, and she's very much into ethnobotany and trying to capture that, because a lot of the landscape and the plants are changing because of climate change. And so these are some of the photos of like the communities that she's been to, different elders, and then some of the plant harvest. And Eva Diaz goes into some of that process and recording the names and capturing the uses of the plants. Marianne Nicholson, she is also from Canada, from the Kincombe Inlet. And she's got this a beautiful way of working with installation and historical photography, and she's very much a steward of her community and her community's cultural practices. And she's, if you ever get a chance, just Google her and then watch a lecture of hers. She's a brilliant speaker. And so these are some of the historic photos of her community. And then she creates these beautiful light boxes utilizing her community's designs from their potlatches and also their big houses. And then she'll take these photos and install them in these light boxes. And then there's like a light mechanism that kind of goes up and down. So it creates these amazing shadows. Almost like you get a sense that you're actually in the space with those images. And so these are just some of the images of inspiration. Another artist, Christabelle Stewart, she is also First Nations. And she's living in Germany. And this is something that I've known about for a long time. So in Germany, they have these Indian camps where they will dress like certain native communities or tribes, and they have a whole camp, and they're quite specific. I've seen them dress up as Apsáalooke hot dancers, and I'm just like, that is pretty obscure, and I'm just like, how like and it's something that I've been kind of interested in because in one way they try to do things as an authentic, and I'm putting authentic in air quotes here, as possible. But Christabelle, she's been living in Germany, in Berlin. She's made, oh, I drew on this. I'm sorry. I don't know how that happened. Anyways, she's became friends with some of these hobbyists. A lot of times we'll call people who make native regalia that aren't from those communities, outside of those communities, hobbyists. And so she's made friends with some of these hobbyists, and then actually has gone to some of these camps, and she started talking about it as kind of like a reverse anthropology, in which she's like documenting them, and they've even gifted her dresses. And so this is a series written by Philip J. Deloria, is about this project and some of the images that she's gathering from these different Germans dressing as different native people, including like interiors of their homes. And then this is an installation at Nanaimo Art Gallery in British Columbia. The floor is an installation of all these sort of filled photos, and then this beautiful dress is actually made by one of those hobbyists and gifted to Christabelle. It's like, I actually wouldn't mind, you know, if maybe one of them gifted me a nice elk tooth crow dress. Anyways, she also shared this video, and I was like, had a really hard time watching it. It was a little bit too intense for me. So it's a very interesting project. I wish I could get rid of this like lovely line that I scrolled across, but
I wonder if I can.
So Indigenous Gaze is an article by Julian Brave Noise Cat about Zacharias Canuck, who did this amazing film called Arjuna, I'm saying that wrong, The Fast Runner, which came out in 2001. I highly recommend it. It's like a 3-hour-long movie, but it is all done in the Inuit language. And I think it was like one of the first long fiction films to be done in the Inuit language. And I remember seeing it when it first came out, and I watched it multiple times. It's just a phenomenal movie about one of their mythological stories.
Wendy,
Yes.
there was a question. Someone said, what was the name of that film?
Fast Runner, Arjuna. I think I'm saying that wrong, but it's Arjuna Fast Runner, and you can see it right here. Wow, you got rid of that line drawing I made.
I
That was
tried. I'm
impressive.
not exactly sure what I did, but I did something.
I mean, the two of us together, it's a pretty good team.
Yeah, thanks.
And here's another a writer, David Truer. He's the author of numerous books, including The Heartbeat of Wounded Knee, Native America from 1890 to the Present. And he's a professor of English at the University of Southern California. You know what? I cried when I read this one too, because it's about his friend and this amazing connection they had. And then his friend ends up passing. And I was just like, big tearjerker, but it's such a beautiful, beautiful piece of writing. And again, it's sort of a family. They took each other as brothers. And so this is like a family photograph of them during one of their hunting trips. Alan Michelson just gave a talk with Christy Isles. She's a curator at the Whitney of his work last Thursday. It was really great, and they went into the specific details of a lot of these projects that are included. And Ellen Michelson does such an amazing job about talking about the history of place, specifically in New York. And he is from Mohawk Nation. And so a lot of his community's land is in that area. And so just really fascinated with the way that he utilizes history and archives and photography, and then produces these amazing installations. And this was more of like an interview. Karen Miranda Rivendernia, I'm saying that wrong. She's got this beautiful series called The Sky Woman, which is an origin story, which she mixed together with a few different origin stories. Sky Woman, Emerald Woman, and Spider Woman. And she created this work, I believe, near Taos, New Mexico, kind of articulating different aspects of these origin stories. And it's just a really beautiful series of work. Aperture asked me if I could think of an artist who's sort of this kind of important cornerstone for Indigenous artists. And immediately I thought of Rebecca Bellmore. And she was actually kind of one of those first artists that I remember really connecting to when I was in graduate school, seeing another Native woman. And she really is interdisciplinary. A lot of people know her for her performative work. And she had a conversation with Wanda Nanny Bush, who is a curator in Canada. And the great thing is that I learned was that a lot of these photographs, Rebecca actually works with a photographer. So she worked with a photographer with this series of work. I want to make sure I'm saying it right. I think five sisters, where she created these different sisters, and then she photographed herself in different environments. But that was something that I hadn't realized, that she had this sort of relationship of working and directing a photographer, and then also working with her sister. So a lot of these images are of her sister that she shows up in multiple works. And then she also created this other body of work which you'll see pieces of these here. And these body of works are called All My Relations. And basically, these were originally performances that Rebecca did. And then she just took like moments from those different performances and then had her sister pose, acting out just like one of those moments within that performance. And I was actually listening to this podcast last night called Criminal, and they were talking about these First Nations, a lot of First Nations men in Saskatchewan area that they would find frozen. And it turned out that the Saskatchewan Police Department would take these First Nations men, if they were like intoxicated, and then drive them out into remote areas, and then tell them to walk off their intoxication. But the problem was it would be like 40 below zero, and they would end up dying. And so this is a piece that Rebecca Bellmore, the original performance, was about one of those victims named Neil Stonechild. And it's like about his mother and her suffering that loss. So it was sort of kind of uncanny to actually hear that podcast talking about that, and then remembering that Rebecca had created this performance based around that. And I think we're getting towards the end here. Guadalupe Maravilla. He's an incredible artist. If you follow on Instagram, he's doing such important work right now with the pandemic, where he has an amazing story of migration. As a young, he's actually doing this important work right now where he is raising money and actually giving out money to undocumented immigrants in New York City. And it's just like so inspiring to watch him on Instagram saying, I gave this amount out this week. And so here's some of his beautiful work that really is about sort of, I really like shamanism and healing. He's a survivor of cancer, and so there's a lot of talk about like origin stories and survival, and just really great work. And then the final body of work is mine, and written by Julia Bryan Wilson, and these are just from my experience at the National Museum of the American Indian, which I've gone to a lot of museums that have collections of Apsáalooke objects. But this is the first time that I've gone to an institution and actually got to physically touch the objects without gloves on my hand. And in some cases, I don't even get to touch the objects with gloved hands. I get to watch somebody else hold the objects. But they kept saying, like, these are your objects, or these are your community's objects, and we're just watching, the stewards of those. And every time they would say that, or I'd have an opportunity to actually like hold or touch an object, it would really kind of it would really hit me to actually be able to connect in that way with my ancestors' material objects. And then this is a work called Apsáalooke Roses that actually was produced here at Crow Shadow, the residency that I'm at right now. And I made this in 2016, and it's actually an image of Beatrice, my daughter, around the age of, I don't know, 8 or 9, and then myself, same age, at the same event called Crow Fair, which is an event that happens, a cultural event that happens on my reservation. And we're a matrilineal society, so I'm really kind of talking about that matrilineal aspect of passing cultural knowledge down to the next generation. And then this is a body of work that is recently acquired by MoMA, the Accession Series. And then lastly, this is actually showing at Photoville in New York City right now, a snippet of this timeline, which is about Crow Fair, the cultural event, which started in 1904 as a way to assimilate crows into farming culture, but then we sort of took it over, and it's like a cultural renewal, the fair that happens every August. We didn't actually have it because of COVID. I think this is the last one. And then this is another piece that I made at this residency that I'm at right now called Crow Shadow. And then we ended the magazine with this amazing sculpture by Dorothea Trujillo's. She is a Pueblo potter at Cochetti, I think is how you say it. And these are really fabulous because they're actually making fun of the tourists that come and photograph them. And so a lot of the potters then started, I think in like, I'm not going to cruise the date, but yeah, they started making all of these pottery pieces mocking tourists doing these certain kind of invasive things when they would visit. And then at first they were sort of discounted, and then people started really see like, you know, these are actually a part of the native story and also very important artifacts to be included. All right. I talked a lot. I was hoping I'd get like these questions, these burning questions.
Okay, here's a burning question.
Okay.
How does one get this issue?
So you can order it off of Aperture, the Aperture website.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one way. Or if you have a local magazine shop, there's another way. You could ask if they could bring it in. But yeah, I think Aperture is exclusively selling them through the website.
Okay, cool.
How are you going to get yours?
Oh, somebody just posted where you can get it.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yep. Mine's in the mail.
Oh, okay. Just double checking.
Yes, don't you worry. Mine's in the mail. And then I have, this one I get to borrow. Here's a question. What role does managing your own artist archive factor into your work and the archives of other collections and your responses to those?
Oh, it's huge. I feel like it's this kind of right now, the way that it's like this web, and I'm sort of like connecting like the missing links in the web. And so every time I get an opportunity to go into these collections, I get to kind of fill in those links. And then me personally, then I'm taking that information and saying, well, this is kind of what I've learned from my community of like what's going on in this image, or what would make that fill in the blank for that piece. So they're intermarried.
Yeah.
The two archives.
That makes sense. Come on, everyone, burning questions. You're all dying to know. Okay, here's one. If we want, I should probably read these to myself first and then read them aloud.
Okay, yeah, I have this chihuahua here.
Oh yeah, look at that. I was gonna say, I saw the chihuahua jump up on your lap at one point. If we want to experience more amazing artists from these cultures and nations, do you have journals, websites, or other sources to recommend?
That's a great question. One institution that has been putting on a fellowship, and they've put on an exhibition, and they've also been like including collecting contemporary Native art, is the Eiteljorg. EITELJORG.
Can you do that one? Spell it one more time and I'll write it out.
So EITELJORG, Eiteljorg, and it's in Indianapolis.
Okay.
And so they actually have publications. And so I think they're like a great resource, a great kind of starting point. And the Denver Art Museum actually has a really wonderful contemporary Native arts collection as well. So they're kind of like another great plug. The AOG, am I saying that right? That's in Toronto. That's where Wanda Nanny Bush is the curator. They're also a great resource to kind of dig in to as well.
Our director, one of our directors said, "Thank you so much, Wendy, for sharing this work and your thinking behind this issue. It's beautiful." That was a comment, not a question.
Thank you.
Here's a question. Do you have any advice for other artists to get into a residency, 100% Native or otherwise?
This is your question.
Oh. Maybe that's for VSC.
That is for you.
Okay.
My thing is just apply to so many.
Yeah.
I would apply to as many as possible. And then there's also some great ones. Like if you're just like interested in a place, like for instance, the Yellowstone National Park, they have an artist residency.
Right.
If you want to nerd out over there, like, so you might like there are places, like if you think of a place, like I'd like to like explore that place.
Yeah.
They might also have an artist residency.
That's a great angle. Thanks for that. That's awesome, Wendy. Okay, here's one. Has your experience working with your daughter and these archival objects in your art allowed you any insight into how to bring archives alive for young people? Your exhibition at Apsáalooke is so engaging and critical. Is asking artists to respond to items in the archives the best way? Question mark.
Oh, thank you. And Apsáalooke has a space specifically for a younger audience, for kids, called Kid Space. And so I was really excited to show in that space because they're actually inviting contemporary artists to show in that space. And they don't want you to simplify works or tone down. Well, I mean, to a certain extent, but I find that so exciting that they're like opening up that world for the younger audiences. And in the case of me working with my daughter Beatrice, we did collaborate when she was 7 till the age of 11, and then she asked to retire. But I learned so much from her, and what I learned was that kids know so much, and they're so proactive. And she used to give these tours to children's tours of art collections. Like she gave one at the Denver Art Museum and the Tang Teaching Museum and the Pulitzer. And what I saw from that, because I've seen like docents give tours to younger audiences, and the level of engagement when my daughter, like all the kids were just glued on to like what she was saying and doing. And so I think that is the key, like to try to get younger kids more involved in doing things like that around like tours or programming in these institutions. Because they don't want to listen to the old adult talking.
What have you learned about Beatrice's retirement?
Oh my gosh. Well, she's retired from collaborating with me and going to museums, but then she's gone into this place of critiquing, still critiquing my work and my practice. And then she actually, they almost thought of giving her an editor's credit in this, because like, she would like have these little comments about certain aspects or what image she thought should be included. So that's what I've learned about her retirement. It's more now like hyper-focused on how I'm conducting myself.
That's amazing. Okay, here's a question. Can you share a bit about the work you are currently working on during your residency? It's been amazing to follow your printmaking process on Instagram.
Oh, I'm glad that you are following that. So I'm super into my genealogy right now, especially specifically diving into my crow side. And part of that is because when I was at the National Museum of the American Indian, we found in their database over 100 objects that were biologically related to me, of my family members, biologically. So this is a Western sense of kinship. And so, and I started asking about that, and some of them are sacred objects, and they said that there's a possibility that those objects could come back to my family. And so I asked, well, how would you go about doing that? And they said, well, they would need to verify that. And one of their verifications is they use ancestry.com. And I was like, well, I've never checked into that. So I looked into it. And one of the reasons why I didn't was because I thought I would only be able to get to my great grandparents. But it turns out I've gone up to like my fourth grandparent through the research. And with that, yeah, I'm just right now focusing on like doing this sort of projects around genealogy with this residency of my grandma and her grandparents, right? Mm-hmm. So you're seeing images of my great grandma, which I've shown on when she's in this magazine, and then my great grandfather, his name is Dust, and then she's the grandchild. And so I'm just sort of doing this lineage. And part of the reason I'm doing that is because I want that for my daughter. So she'll have these records. And then also the other reason I'm doing that is I'm putting all of their name and how you say it in Crow and all of that. So I'm very much aware if somebody buys it or collects it, that I want to make sure that all the images and the people in the images are credited. If that makes sense. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that's what I'm currently working on. Is we're having a blast. I'm having a blast. I don't know about the master. I think she's having a good time.
On Instagram, it does look like you're all having a blast, so it's good. Yeah. Let's see. Hi, Wendy. I met you last year at VSC. Thanks for the studio visit.
Hi.
I don't know if I should tell you. I'm not reading anyone's names. Can you expand on your experience working with the archivists during your time at the Smithsonian Fellowship? When you went into that fellowship, did you know what archives would be there?
I just knew that they had a ton of Crow objects. I think they have like 1,200 Crow objects, and that's not including photographs. Wow. So no, I wasn't. And then I got into some really obscure things that I've never seen before. So some of those things I'm holding in my hand are like things I've never seen before, parts of our culture that I haven't experienced. And even things like benign things, like they have a porcupine brush, a hairbrush. This is like porcupine hair, and it's incredible. And these giant ladles made out of like buffalo horn, the size of my head. Like I've never seen that. These like amazing utilitarian objects. But it's wonderful. The archivists that I worked with at the National Museum of the American Indian were so great to work with. And the thing that we sort of found with their sort of expertise of how that system works, I could say I'm looking for this, and then they would know how to find it. And then once we would find like an image or an object, then I would rattle off like the things that I knew about it, and then they would input it. And it's sort of this really kind of beautiful collaboration between the two of us. So the photo archivist, excellent. And then also the collections manager was great to work with. And then it's just a surreal experience to be in this giant building that has rows and rows of native objects, and then you'll go in these rows and there's these drawers that have your community's name on it.
Wow.
Just rows, and then you pull them out, and then there's these beautiful objects. It's like I could spend years there.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
Somebody else also said, wow, that's incredible.
And then you get to ride around on these machines that lift you up in the air and down.
Wow, that's also incredible. Somebody said that you're doing another talk this Wednesday at 3:30 on Pacific Coast time about your residency at Crow's Shadow.
Yes, I am.
Okay. And what is that talk going to be similar about?
I'm going to be talking specifically about like the work that I'm doing here.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah. I'm doing a talk at 7:30 a.m. with the Columbia Photo Department that same day. So
you should stay up all night.
I think I am. I think I'm going to stay up all night.
Oh, no. Okay, let's see. Are there any more burning questions? It's 8:07. I'll give it another minute. Okay, here's one. How do you experience non-Native artist collectors reflect and explore Native American Indian history and culture? This is from a very curious German. That's what they said.
Are they one of the German Indians? Christabelle Stewart.
Yeah.
You know, sometimes that can be tough, you know. It's really interesting actually with this genealogy project. I have this picture of my grandma, and it's when she's like probably like 12, and she's wearing her elk tooth dress, and the printmaker here said, "So is this your great grandma?" And I was like, "No, that's actually my grandma." But I mean, it's a black and white photo, and I was just thinking about that. It's like this is that woman who held me in her arms, and like wow. We have this relationship, but to somebody else it looks like a photo from the turn of the century, right. You know. And so, and actually in this one particular print, it's me, my daughter, and my dad and my grandma, and we've all held each other in our arms at various points in various stages of our life. Wow. And that's really kind of what I'm talking about. So sometimes it can be hard because these are real people and real experiences and life experiences. And so, yeah, I think that's one of the things that can be a little bit touchy, is the loss of humanity.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, I'm gonna wait for one more burning question.
Okay.
I'm waiting. Oh, okay, here's one. What's giving you joy right now?
This residency, and the fact that this residency let me bring my dogs. They also would let me bring my kiddo, but she's like, the internet's not that great. She's doing like virtual school. But yeah, that's giving me joy. And I don't have any studio assistant or anything like that. So to actually work with two printmakers who they come every day here at 8:30, and they like work until 5:30 to 7:30 on my ideas and my work, and I'm just incredibly like in awe and grateful for that. So that's bringing me immense joy, and the fact that I get to be on the Umatilla Indian Reservation makes me very happy too. So thank you for that question.
This is my own question. Is
it burning?
It's burning. It's from deep down. Do you need an assistant from the East Coast to move out there and help you? Like me?
Sure. Yeah, okay. That would be great.
Okay, awesome. Cool. Just let me know when and I'll be there.
Let's start in 2021.
Yeah.
Hopefully things go right.
Yeah. Yes. Well, Wendy, I don't want to actually get off this call, but I know you have things to do, and I guess other people do as well. But I just want to say thank you so much for your time and for your generosity and your insight. And I had the chills, actually. It's super powerful and moving, and I just can't thank you enough. So
thank you. Thank you so much, Kristen, and thank you to Vermont Studio for inviting me. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
And I'm smiling. Hey, behind
I can tell. I can see your eyes. Yes.
Good. Everyone be safe. And thank you for spending the time with us tonight.
Bye, Carl.
Bye. Bye.
Thanks, Wendy. I'll be in touch again soon.
Okay, thank you.
Bye, everybody. Thank you. It's good to see your faces.